How's it, everyone? This is Lolcohol. Today's video is going to be an overview of crafting in Path of Exile 2. One of the reasons that I think a lot of people don't really understand crafting in this game is that they don't understand how items themselves function. Many guys will jump straight into the deep end but not cover the basics. So with this guide, I'm going to start right at the very beginning, and it's very important to make sure you understand these fundamentals because these inform absolutely everything else when it comes to crafting. So some of this might seem very basic to many of you, but it's critical to understand. So let's get on with it. We're starting out with item modifiers. Item modifiers are the things that you see on items. These over here, these are item modifiers. Some people are going to refer to these as mods or stats. The thing to remember with these is that items have explicit modifiers and implicit modifiers. Explicit modifiers are the ones over here. These are the ones that you're able to change on an item with crafting. Implicit modifiers exist on items regardless of their rarity. So for example, over here, we have this Cinderbark talisman. It's white and it has an implicit modifier, increased flammability magnitude. This exists on the item regardless of its rarity. Explicit modifiers are these ones over here. Now, the next thing is that explicit modifiers are broken up into prefixes and suffixes. Certain modifiers are always going to be prefixes. Certain modifiers are always going to be suffixes. I'll explain how to learn this a bit later in the video. But for example, maximum life is a prefix. Maximum mana is a prefix. Resistances are suffixes. Strength is a suffix. So now we know what explicit mods are. We know what implicits are. This up here is an enchantment. Enchantments can be granted by various methods, such as corrupting items or with socketable augments. That's how you get this enchantment over here. But the next thing to discuss before we move on is item rarity. There's a few different item rarities that exist in PoE, and it affects how many modifiers an item can have. So with a white item, this has 0 explicit modifiers. It's still able to have an implicit, which exists on the item regardless of rarity. Then, moving up, we have magic items. Magic items can have up to 1 prefix and 1 suffix. That's it. From there, we move up into rare items. Now, rare items can have up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. A rare item can have fewer than that. It can have like 2 prefixes and 3 suffixes, or 2 prefixes, 2 suffixes, but the maximum amount it can have is 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Of course, you also get unique items. These are different. These are not necessarily prefixes or suffixes, and they don't follow the rules of normal items. Now, the first question you probably have is, why does this matter? And also, why are modifiers broken up into prefixes and suffixes, and how do I know which is which? So firstly, why are they broken up into prefixes and suffixes? For example, if an item could have 6 suffixes and 0 prefixes, you could have an item with tons of resistances, like 4 resistances and life regeneration and something else. So this is sort of to break up items into having distinct mods that they can roll up to a certain amount without going too high. If you could have 4 suffixes, you could have fire res, cold res, chaos res, lightning res, but instead by limiting it, there's a limit to how many resistances an item could have. Same with a weapon. A lot of damage modifiers are prefixes. So if an item could have, let's say, 6 prefixes, you could have flat physical damage, percent physical damage, cold damage, lightning damage, fire damage. It would just be a bit too much. But this brings us on to the next question, which is, how do I know which modifiers are prefixes and which ones are suffixes? This does take some time to learn. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize all of these because it's going to take ages. This is the kind of thing that as you engage more with the game and crafting, you start to learn. One thing that I can say, in general, for prefixes on weapons, things related to damage are going to be prefixes. So I'm talking about things like percent increased physical damage or flat elemental damage. When I say flat, that is like a flat number adds 9 to 11 cold damage. That's a flat amount. It's not a percentage. That's an example of flat, and that's generally almost always going to be a prefix. Other examples, on caster weapons, you have things like spell damage, elemental damage. Those are general prefixes. For other items, let's say like jewelry, which includes belts, rings, and amulets, common prefixes are going to be maximum life, mana. On boots, a common prefix is movement speed. Other ones that you're going to run into a lot on armors, such as helmets and body armors, prefixes include things like armor, evasion rating, energy shield, spirit. So more defensive type ones. As for suffixes, suffixes on weapons generally are going to be things like attack and cast speed, things that don't increase how hard it hits necessarily, but affects how quickly it hits or the critical strike chance, those sorts of things. Increased level of skills is another common suffix. Other common suffixes include things like attributes, all attributes, resistances is a very, very big one, and crit related modifiers. So crit damage bonus, attack speed, but the big ones to remember are going to be resistances and attributes. I know that might seem like a lot, but like I said, the more you engage with your items, the more you're going to learn these things. One thing you can always do is press Alt on an item, and that'll show over here. Let me just pin this. Over here, you can see it says prefix, and then it has the prefix modifiers, and then suffix, and has the suffix modifiers. So over time, you will learn this. You don't have to memorize it all. Now discussing the mod pool. This is a term you're going to hear quite frequently. The mod pool is all of the modifiers that potentially can exist on an item. So let's say I were to use a transmutation on this crossbow. It's going to upgrade it from normal rarity to magic rarity with one modifier. And the modifier it adds is going to be drawn from the mod pool. So there's like a list of potential things it can get, and it's going to select one of those. Not to freak you out, don't worry, you do not have to learn all this, but this is an example of the mod pool for dexterity body armors. These are the modifiers that can appear on the item. This website's called Path of Exile, if you want to check it out. But for example, here are our prefixes. We have the evasion rating and max life and spirit that I spoke about, and the suffixes like dexterity, resistances, and life regeneration. These are all the mods that can potentially roll in the item. So that's when people say the mod pool, these are modifiers that can exist on items. For example, weapons have a different mod pool to body armors. Body armors can't roll % increased physical damage, and weapons cannot roll % increased armor. Those don't exist within those mod pools, so they cannot roll those modifiers. So just understanding what the mod pool is as a concept will help you understand which modifiers items can get. Now, one important aspect of the mod pool is understanding how an item base type affects the modifiers it can roll, especially with regards to armor types. So in Path of Exile, there are 3 different attribute types. We have strength, dexterity, and intelligence. And there are base types that relate to each of those attributes. For example, with armors, we have full strength body armors. These provide armor as a defense. These cannot roll evasion rating or energy shield. They're also only able to roll strength as an attribute suffix. We also have full dexterity body armors. This can roll evasion rating as a prefix and dexterity as a suffix. Same for intelligence. This grants us energy shield, and this can roll energy shield as prefixes and intelligence as suffixes. However, we also have hybrid armor types. Something like this. This is a strength intelligence body armor, and it has a broader mod pool where it's able to roll modifiers that exist in both the pure strength and the pure intelligence mod pool. So this can roll armor and energy shield, and it's also able to roll strength and intelligence. So that's an example of how an item type affects the mod pool. This also partially exists for weapons, where you have certain base types that are pure strength or pure dexterity. it isn't as limiting. For example, a pure dex weapon like a bow can still roll physical damage, same as a pure strength weapon like a mace. However, this may have some other changes depending on whether it is a ranged weapon or if it is a melee weapon, and also the attribute type. So this could roll dexterity, but a full strength weapon like a mace could only roll strength. And again, this is something that takes time to learn, so don't worry about learning it all, but it's something that you do need to understand, is that certain items can only roll certain modifiers, but not all modifiers. The modifiers that do appear, though, are fairly intuitive. Like I said, a weapon can't roll armor, armor can't roll physical damage. Let's just talk about some examples where this knowledge can apply. So we know that a rare item can only have 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Why is this useful? Let's say, for example, you're leveling a new character and you pick up these laced boots of the Lynx. Now, you know that magic items can only have 1 prefix and 1 suffix. If you check these boots, these currently have 1 suffix. We know that movement speed is a prefix that can appear on boots. If I were to use an augment, which adds a modifier to a magic item, you could say, this has the potential to get movement speed if I were to use an augment on it. If these boots already had a prefix and you didn't know that movement speed was a prefix, you waste an augment trying to hit movement speed when the item could never actually roll it. So in this case, we could say, we've got an augment, let's just see, maybe we can get movement speed. We didn't hit it, but that's okay, there was at least a chance for it to appear. A more complex example of this would be on, let's say, a rare item, which we know can only have 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. With a perfect essence of battle, what it does is it removes a random modifier and augments a rare item with a new guaranteed modifier. The modifier it's going to add is +3 to level of all attack skills on a one-handed melee weapon or bow, and +5 level of all attack skills on a two-handed melee weapon or crossbow. Through experience, you may come to learn that plus levels is a suffix. If we think about this now, this item has 3 suffixes and 3 prefixes. It's full. Let's pretend that our prefixes are amazing here. We've got 3 damage prefixes and we don't want to mess those up, but we also want to get plus level of attack skills because that increases our damage. Now, because this is a suffix modifier, in order for it to add this modifier, it will have to remove a suffix to make space to add this modifier. So this will remove a modifier and then add the guaranteed one. But if it were to, let's say, remove a prefix and then add this modifier, this would suddenly have 4 suffixes, which cannot exist. Rare items cannot have 4 suffixes in almost all cases. So what we can discern from this is if we were to use this on this item, our prefixes would be entirely safe because it has to remove a suffix to make space to add a suffix. So if we use this, our prefixes, the damage ones, are not going to change. And instead, it's going to remove a suffix to add that modifier. Now, if this item had only 5 modifiers, it would potentially be able to, let's say, remove a prefix to add a suffix because the item wasn't full. The only reason that it had to remove a suffix is because it had to add a suffix. Now, I want to go over another example of where understanding all of this is helpful. Let's say you're in Act 2 and you get a nice crossbow. This thing, you check it out and it has 2 prefixes and 3 suffixes. One thing you could do, now that you hopefully know that damage modifiers are prefixes, you could exalt this to hopefully add another damage modifier. There is a chance that you could add something like accuracy, which wouldn't be great for most builds. But another thing you could do could be to use a jawbone. Now, this is a mechanic from Abyss. You'll start finding abysses in Act 2 onwards. The way this works is that it desecrates an item. There's one for weapons, armors, and jewelry. Desecration adds a modifier that is hidden, but you're able to reveal it at the Well of Souls to pick one of 3 modifiers. In this case, let's say you had this, you could say, I want to get another damage modifier, and this has an open prefix, I could exile slam it, but let's go with this. So it's going to add a prefix. If this item had 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes, it would randomly remove one of those and then add the desecrated modifier. There are some ways to fix that, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Anyway, this is the Abyss mechanic. Like I said, you'll find it in the second act. And I'm going to show you the Well of Souls. So the Well of Souls you can reach from the Mastodon Badlands. So within the Mastodon Badlands, you can find the Lightless Passage. So at the end of the Lightless Passage, you'll find the Well of Souls. You can go in here, and this is the area that will allow you to reveal desecrated modifiers. So you can place the item in here, and it's kind of like using an Exalt, but you get multiple options. So in this case, we could say I want 8 to 12 fire damage. We throw it in, and we get it back. And here's our item. So that's another form of very basic campaign crafting. Now, the next thing to speak about is modifier tiers and item level. So if we press Alt on an item, over on the right, you can see the modifier tier over here. So this is tier 5 spirits, tier 4 life, tier 2 armor and evasion rating. You can think of modifier tiers as almost a level, where tier 1 is the highest, and then the lowest is going to depend on how many modifier tiers exist. So for example, life might have like 10 tiers, resistances might have like 7 tiers. So the lowest tier of resistance might be tier 7, and the highest is always going to be tier 1. Now, something that relates to modifier tiers is item level. As you go through the game and kill monsters, you're going to go through higher area levels where the monsters are going to be a higher level. Monsters will drop items that are similar to their monster level. So in higher level areas, you will find higher level items. Higher level items are able to roll higher tier modifiers. For example, this is a very low tier chest. This is an item level 15 chest. This can only roll some of the lower tiers of modifiers. This is to prevent a low item level item from rolling an endgame tier modifier. For example, this is a reasonable amount of life to have on a chest that can be equipped on a character level 4. However, if you could roll this 174 life on a chest that requires level 4, that would be completely overpowered. So as you progress, you're going to find higher item level items, and these can roll potentially higher item tier modifiers. Again, this is part of the mod pool. So as you find higher item level items, the mod pool kind of expands. Again, I can hop over to Path of Exile to give you an example of this, but let's just look at life on body armor. If we click this, these are all the tiers that can appear. You can see right at the top, we have tier 1. This can roll 200 to 214 to maximum life. This can only appear on item level 80. Lower level ones, you can see we can get tier 13 life. This appears on level 1 items, and we can get tier 12 life on item level 6 and above. This really matters when doing both high-end crafts. For example, if I wanted to make like the ultimate endgame body armor with like perfect stats, I want to make sure that the item is actually able to roll the modifiers that I want it to be able to roll. Again, this is unfortunately something that you have to either learn or go to third-party resources to learn, but it's part of the process, and it's something that you come to learn over time as you go. So don't worry about learning all of this. It's just, if you are going to do a high-end craft, just make sure to reference the item level that is required in order to hit the modifiers that you actually want to hit. But again, this is not super important early on. It's more just understanding that item level affects which tier of modifiers can appear on the item. Very high item level items can still roll the lowest tiers, but they're also able to roll the highest tiers. Now, one other thing to mention when it comes to modifier tiers is they have roll ranges. So you can see over here, this physical damage rolls between 135 and 154%. Now, a divine orb. This randomizes the numeric values of modifiers on an item. New players will often misunderstand and think, I can have an item like this that has physical damage, cold damage, fire damage. Those are all great modifiers. Can I use my valuable Divine Orb to change those modifiers to like higher tiers? Unfortunately not. The way that this works is that it rolls these modifier values within their range and the tier will never change. So if I use this over here, you'll see that let's just look at the fire damage is currently 8 to 16 or 8 to 12. It goes up to 8 to 15. Same on this one. We have 167 physical damage. It goes down to 161. We can do it a couple more times just to see. And yeah, so those modifier ranges are kind of like brackets within a range that divines can roll the modifier. Now, the next thing to understand is that modifiers exist in modifier groups. Items can only have one modifier of the same modifier group. For example, if an item like this already has maximum life, it cannot roll maximum life again. For example, we have this Essence of the Body. Upgrades a magic item to a rare item, adding a guaranteed modifier, grants maximum life. This will not work on this because this already has maximum life. So you can see over here, failed to apply. This item already has a mod of this type. However, if we were to get a helmet like this, add a suffix, we could Essence of the Body this, and it would work because this doesn't already have maximum life. Now, mod groups can get quite complicated and interesting. There are some cases where you can potentially block modifiers from rolling on an item by adding other ones that are part of the same mod group. That's quite advanced, but for now, just the basics is to understand that items can only have one mod of the same type. There's another important piece of crafting that isn't as relevant in Path of Exile 2 right now, but it has been in the past, and that is of tags. So every modifier has a name. In this case, this tier 3 physical damage is known as cruel, but it has tags. Those tags are damage, physical, and attack. There's a few modifiers that don't have tags, but the majority do. If we look at something like strength, that has the attribute tag. This one actually doesn't, level of all projectile skills. Like I said, currently this doesn't impact tons in the game, but in previous leagues, there were items that would say something like, adds a modifier to an item with similar modifiers that exist on the item. So the way that would work was it would look at modifier tags on your item. So let's say we just had this damage, physical, attack, and it would add another modifier. It would take it from the mod pool, the potential mods that it could roll, and then add a modifier that matched that. So if crafting currencies like that are reintroduced to the game, there is one, but it's not that useful. If those are added back to the game, that's where tags start becoming very important. So now that all of that is out of the way, let's go through a craft and try and make an item. I'm going to try and make something fairly similar to this. So this is a crossbow with % physical damage. It has flat physical damage, and then it also has something called hybrid physical damage, which is the % and accuracy combined modifier. That's one modifier, but it has two lower values than their respective normal counterparts. Then for our suffixes, the most important thing is going to be level of all projectile skills, but we can make something even better than this. So the first thing is we need to find our base. When I say the word base, I'm referring to generally a white item that is craftable. Different items have different base stats. So as we look here, these are all the crossbows. We can go to the bottom and say, okay, for a grenade crossbow, we might want to use a siege crossbow. This thing has base physical damage of 29 to 115, and grenades fire an additional projectile. So we could say, okay, we want to use a siege crossbow. The other thing is we're going to want to try and hit high flat added damage or % fizz. So we would want to look at this list and say, if I even want to be able to get tier 1 physical damage, I need an item level 82 base. We have some bases here. These are item level 81, so these can't actually hit tier 1% physical damage. They can still hit tier 2, which is pretty close to tier 1, and they can hit tier 1 flat damage. Now in Path of Exile, there is a strategy which is farming high level white bases for other people to craft on, and it's for this exact reason. A siege crossbow with, let's say, 3 sockets, which is something that can spawn, it's very rare. Item level 82 is going to be very lucrative to a lot of people because it can hit all the modifiers people want. It has an extra augment socket, which adds additional damage. And therefore, because it's very rare and very lucrative for people who craft, that base is very valuable. We can even look at something like that. So we can look at like an I-82, item level 82, siege crossbow. This is on standard, but we can at least get an idea. Item level 82. We also want it to be normal rarity, and we can search. There are 20. These ones aren't too expensive. If we were to say add 3 augment sockets, suddenly it becomes extraordinarily expensive, where it's 900 divines just for this base. And that's because this thing has everything you want. So the first thing we want to do is try and get one modifier that we want on this. So we're looking for, let's say, like high flat lightning damage or % physical damage. First thing we can do is we can use a perfect orb of transmutation. The way this works is it works like a normal transmute. It's going to upgrade a normal item to a magic item with 1 modifier. However, the minimum modifier level it will add is 70. So if we look back at Path of Exile, we can see over here, minimum modifier level of 70 means that it can only hit modifiers that have a level of 70 and above, unless the tier 1 modifier exists at a lower level. So, for example, if increased elemental damage with attacks, the tier 1 spawned at level 60, it would still be able to roll with a perfect orb of transmutation. But this gives us a much, much higher chance to get a good modifier that we're looking for, because it cuts out a lot of the stuff that we do not want. That being said, just because it improves our chances doesn't mean we're always guaranteed to get something that we want. One thing to mention is that of weight. So every modifier in the game has a chance to roll. So when you use, let's say, a transmute on an item, it'll select one modifier from the pool of potential modifiers it can roll, but it's almost like a lucky packet with multiple tickets for different modifiers. So some modifiers are going to be more common and have more tickets, whereas other modifiers are going to be much more rare and have fewer tickets. For example, one that is very rare is % increased physical damage. This has a weight of 0.025% chance to be pulled. So this is a very, very low chance, whereas something like lightning damage has a higher chance, 0.251. This is a little bit easier to see on PoE 2DB. I know I'm introducing a lot of websites, but this is the only way I can really do it right now. Hopefully they add this kind of thing in-game. But let's say we want to hit physical damage and it has a weight of 50, a 0.112% chance, 50 out of 44,000. This is a total weight pool out of the prefix mod pool. However, if we use the perfect transmute, we set the minimum eye level to 70. Now those weights are much, much better. So the chance to hit physical damage is now 50 out of 2,255, which instead gives us a 2.2% chance to hit what we want. So that's why these are so strong. Many crafting projects are going to start like this. Perfect orbs of transmutation to try and hit something we want. If you don't hit it, you can either get another base like this. And if you get a suffix, we're trying to hit a prefix now. What you can do then is get a new base, or if you have a very, very expensive base, like one of those 900 divine bases, it's going to probably look something like this. You're going to orb of annulment, which is not super cheap, and then go for the orb of augmentation. And we can do it again. That is tier 2 hybrid physical damage, which is maybe something we want to keep, but we can try and get exactly what we want. Nope. Anyway, so that would be the process for like a very, very high-end base. But let's say we now have the lightning damage. We hit tier 2 lightning damage. We're happy with that. What's the next step? So if we want to get a prefix like flat physical damage, There is an essence for this. So with this, Greater Essence of Abrasion, it's going to function like a Regal Orb where it upgrades a magic item to a rare item, adding a modifier, but that modifier is guaranteed. So this is going to add, let's just do it. This adds tier 3 physical damage. So now we have 3 modifiers on the item that we like. Now the next step could be something like we say, all right, do we just Exalt Slam it, or what are our options? I have introduced these Jawbones to you, these things that add desecrated modifiers. There are some special desecrated modifiers that can be added to items. And again, unfortunately, this isn't in game. You do have to use these third-party resources to see everything that's happening under the hood. But it's actually, once you get into it, it's cool being able to see all of it. So we could say, instead of just randomly exalting it, we could look, what are some desecrated modifiers we could get? So we have things like grenades have increased cooldown or grenade damage. Attacks have penetration. There's also some nice suffix ones, like grenades have chance to activate a second time. These are all the different modifiers we can get from desecration. There are also some further complications with things like Amanamu mods or Kurgul or Ulaman modifiers. By the way, if you do want to follow along, I do have crafting guides like this that you can follow, that it will make sense. The more you do it yourself, it'll make sense and it won't be that confusing. I know it's probably a lot right now, but hopefully it has made a bit more sense after I've taken you through the various steps. Now, if we were to just use this preserved jawbone on the item, it would add either a desecrated prefix or a desecrated suffix. There is an omen, which is another form of crafting in Path of Exile, that will guarantee that the next desecration we do will add only a prefix modifier. To use this, you right-click it to make it active. However, one of the modifiers we want is increased grenade damage and increased grenade duration over here. And we can see this is an Amanamu modifier. We can guarantee an Amanamu modifier with an Omen of the Leech. We can right-click that, and then we can use this over here, and it's going to add a desecrated Amanamu prefix modifier. Now what we can do is take it to the Well of Souls, and we can reveal it, and we can get something like this. Grenade damage, grenade duration. Now our prefixes are done. So many crafts are going to go like this, where you think, how do I craft the prefixes and then the suffixes separately? So now let's add some suffixes to our item, because what we want to do now is get plus level of all attack skills from a perfect essence of battle. And we also want to get chance to gain onslaught on killing hits with this weapon. Now, if we were to just use this thing, which removes a modifier, then adds it, it could remove a prefix and then add a suffix. However, like I was saying earlier, if our suffixes are already full, this modifier is a suffix. So in order to add a suffix, it would have to make space and remove a suffix. So if we fill up our suffixes, these two things, which are suffix modifiers that we want to add, would only be able to remove suffixes on our crossbow, and our prefixes would be safe. This is why you often want to do crafts like half and half, so you craft the prefixes and then the suffixes. So we can fill up our suffixes. One way we could do this is just with an exalt. However, we could use a perfect exalted orb, which functions similarly to the perfect transmute and aug. However, it's going to guarantee a minimum modifier level of 50. If we don't want to have to use two of these, because these can be a little bit expensive, we can use an Omen of Greater Exaltation, which will cause the next exalt we use to add 2 modifiers instead of 1. So we can do this, and then a perfect exalted orb, and exalt it, and it has added 2 modifiers, Leech and Leech. From here, what we can do is now, Essence of Battle, it has to remove a suffix to make space to add that. Our prefixes are safe. There's our +5. Now, with the perfect Essence of Haste, there's a chance that this could remove the +5. If that were to happen, we would just use another Essence of Battle and kind of ping pong these. So let's try to do that. We didn't remove it, so at this point, this craft is pretty much done. We have lightning damage, physical damage, grenade damage, +5 level of all attack skills, and onslaught. Of course, there are much higher tier crafts that are going for more ambitious modifiers, but this is an example of a more basic craft. Only thing that would be left to do on something like this would be to add some quality with blacksmith whetstones. I only have a few, and then add in some augment sockets, something like increased physical damage. A little bit low at the moment, but that would be a craft. So I understand this is probably very overwhelming going through a craft like this, but the thing to remember is if you understand those foundations, the things like knowing what a modifier is, prefixes, suffixes, explicits, then crafts should make sense by understanding those foundations. It gets more complicated where you now need to learn specific interactions with different crafting systems. Like I showed you with the Abyss crafting, the only way to do that is really by learning it, watching crafting videos, doing it yourself is especially good. And another good way to learn is to make mistakes. So if you do start crafting yourself and you make mistakes, don't get angry. Everyone makes mistakes when crafting. All you can do is learn from it and try and remember it so you don't do it again in future. I also just want to point out that I have a lot of written guides on crafting over on Mobalytics. I can link this. Much of what I said today is covered in these written guides. I also have sections on more specific crafting, like Abyss crafting, Omens, which I use at the end. This will explain it in more depth. There's also a guide on essences, guides on recombinators, which is another form of crafting that I didn't even touch on in this video because I didn't want to scare you away. And the way that I learned crafting was by following other people crafting long ago. I would just watch crafting videos of people doing crafts that I could never afford myself. But by watching these videos, I have plenty on my channel. You start to understand the systems. And now that you hopefully understand the foundations, when you watch a crafting video like this, even if you aren't able to recreate the craft yourself, you can at least follow along, start learning the words that are being used and what things mean and how different currency items are being applied to achieve an expected outcome. So hopefully this gives you a broad overview of crafting in Path of Exile. There are many systems. There's things like the Recombinator, which is another whole can of worms that I don't want to get into. Next league, we're going to be getting things like alloys. But if you do want to learn crafting, just remember your basics, watch videos, do your own crafts. You can also even go on sites like Path of Exile, and there is an emulator where you can practice crafts. Over here at the top, you go to emulator and you can select your base and do the crafting yourself just to practice without any risk. You can do it like this. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. I also stream on YouTube. And if you have any questions, you can join the Discord. That'll also be linked in the description. You can ask in the comments below. If you feel I missed anything, let me know and I can try and explain it. That's it. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe. Catch you in the next video, and bye-bye.